period. I mean, although we have nothing written in the Bible about those 400 years, doesn't mean that nothing happened. Many things happened. In fact, a lot of Jewish writings have been written during that time. Many of the important Jewish writings which are not included in the biblical canon, but very, very important for understanding the life of Jews and the worldview of Jews. You have to understand the intertestamental period, and you have to understand what happened to them. Now, let us go on to first to the end of the Old Testament history. Now, what happened at the end of the Old Testament history? We all know that the northern Israel fell into the hands of what? Which country? Which pagan country now? You're
Assyria.
Assyria. Okay, Assyria. Okay, good. And the Judea, or the southern Judah, fell into the hands of Babylon. Okay, so in 606 and 5 BC, the Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Judea, and 587 to 86, the Jerusalem, the temple destroyed completely. And Judah goes into exile, and that's when we have the origin of synagogue. Now, by this time, more people were living outside Palestine than inside Palestine. Many people went out of the country because they were forced to move out of the country. And that's where they need to have some replacement for temple. Since they are living abroad, there's no way they can come back to Jerusalem to worship God. So they built a synagogue at a place where they're staying. So that's the origin of synagogue. They wanted to they wanted to continue to worship God. They wanted to continue to study the Torah and teach the Torah to the people of Israel. And how did they do that without a temple? So they built a multiple synagogue where they will study the Torah. No. When I say Torah, I'm talking about the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And the 539 BC, Babylon falls to Cyrus the Great of Persia, and exiles were allowed to return to Israel. And if you read the Zechariah or the Ezra, all those books of the Old Testament are talking about the return of Israelites back to Jerusalem. So now the second temple dedicated by the Zerubbabel, Haggai, and Zechariah. I mean, you will see in these books how the Jews were able to return, and the king of Persia was very generous. I mean he did not deal with the people of Israel harshly, but he was very generous, and he gave them freedom to go back to their hometown to rebuild their temple, and he was very open-minded to the Jewish people at the time. And as we know, the 400 BC, the Malachi was written, which was one of the last Old Testament prophet. And there, if you read the Malachi chapter 3, verse 1, that John the Baptist is predicted. I'm going to read it for you. Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. So in a way, the prophet Malachi is foreseeing the arrival of John the Baptist, who will make the way for Jesus, and that is predicted 400 years before Jesus was actually born. Right? So this is the basic history of what happened to the people of Israel. First, the northern Israel fell into the hands of the Assyria, and the southern Judah fell into the hands of the Babylon. And the Babylon was destroyed by the Persia, and the king of Persia allowed the people of Israel to go back to their hometown, go back to their home country, and they even rebuilt the temple. And we call that the Second Temple. This is the beginning of the Second Temple, and the Second Temple, as we know, will be destroyed in AD 70. So from that time, from the 515 BC to AD 70, we call the Second Temple Jewish period. Second Temple Jewish period. And that's when a lot of the Jewish writings, which I told you, were written, and a lot of things happened, as we are going to look at now. between the Testament. Now, the Greek period. Now, the Persia was the strongest and was the most powerful country at the time, and the Persia conquered most of the Egypt, most of the middle region of Mediterranean, but by the 334 there was a rising star coming out of Macedonia, all of a sudden, and the king of that Macedonia was who? Alexander the Great, which we all know. Now, there were three big battles between the Persia and the Macedonia, where the kingdom of Alexander the Great. And in three battles, the Persia was defeated by the Alexander the Great. So here are the battles of the Granicus and Issus, and finally at the Arbela, which is a very famous battle. If you go to the British Museum in London, you see the historical evidence of the Battle of Arbela. It's a very important archaeological evidence that shows that the story that we read in the Bible is accurate. It's really something that is being testified not only within the Bible but within but by the secular manuscripts. Now, by the 331 BC, he defeats the Darius II in Arbela, which makes him the controlling player in the Middle East, including Israel, and Hellenization begins. Now, what is Hellenization? When Alexander the Great conquered the new land, what he did is that he built a Greek school, he built a Greek temple, and he simply taught the Greek way of life. Now, is that a bad thing or a good thing from the perspective of the church? I think it was the providence of God that Alexander the Great was the controlling player of that time, because in the Mediterranean region, there was a common language, which was Greek, which made the mission a lot more convenient. Can you imagine that if the people had all different languages, if they had their own dialects, it would have been very difficult for the early church to share the gospel effectively. It would take a lot of time to translate the Bible into their own dialect, and you have to go and teach. But and starting from the Alexander the Great, the Hellenization begins, not just in the Palestine, but all of the Palestine, the Middle East and the Mediterranean region, and even in Egypt. So everyone, not everyone, but most of the people were able to speak Greek and read Greek. And Hellenistic schools were located even in the remotest places in Palestine and in Egypt. So whether you like it or not, there's no way you can get out of the influence of the Greek philosophy, the Greek politics, and the Greek history, and the Greek mindset. And the 323, at the age of 31, the Alexander the Great dies. Now, he was one of the greatest warriors. Although he died very young, he achieved so much. His kingdom was one of the largest in human history. And when he died, it was so shocking that many people didn't believe that he actually died for many years. They didn't want to believe. Alexander the Great was the great legacy for them. He was like a god to them. And the news of his death spread through the land very quickly, but many of them thought that he will rise back to life. He will rise back to life, and he will come back again from death. That's how powerful his influence was. Now, when Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was divided into four parts. Was divided by the four generals of the King Alexander. And this is very important. Now, Ptolemy, so 1, 2, 3, 4, it was the kingdom of Alexander the Great, and it was divided into the four parts: Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and the Alexander. Now, at first, here's Israel, right? This is Israel. Israel fell into the hands of the Ptolemy. We're going to look at here. This is what we call the Ptolemaic period, which lasts from 320 BC to 198. 320 BC, when after the King Alexander the Great died, the Israel fell into the Ptolemy in Egypt. Now, the Ptolemy was one of the general, and he was in charge of the area near the Egypt, up to the point where the Israel and the Jordan is. That was the land that he was responsible for. Alexandria was the capital city of that kingdom, and it was the capital of the Ptolemaic Empire, developed into a major center of scholarship and learning. This is located in Egypt, if we call it one in the modern Egypt. And this Alexandria was one of the largest cities in the lower part of the Middle East. And it was the capital city, not just economically and politically, but also academically. There are many, many well-known scholars who studied in that city, and many books were written. And one of the most important projects that the Ptolemaic kingdom did was the Septuagint. It is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. I mean, we have a lot of myth about how that Septuagint was actually translated. The king of this kingdom called the scholars from all of the country, the best scholars who knew the language well, and he ordered these scholars to translate the Old Testament into Greek, because at that time not many people were able to read Hebrews. Hellenization because the Hellenization spread very quickly, and many people forgot to read they forgot to read Hebrews, and not many people were able to speak Hebrew. So the king of this kingdom ordered the scholars from all of the country to translate the Old Testament into Greek. Now, what we can know from this work is that the king of this kingdom was very generous. I mean, he controlled the people of Jews very harshly at first, and then he gave the people of he gave the people of Israel more freedom as time goes on, and he led the scholars to translate the Old Testament into Greek. Now, I'm not sure how long it took the scholars to translate, but when they came back with their own translation, what happened is that all their scholars' translation were the same. Can you imagine that you and I are translating a certain book into English? Well, I mean, how likely is it that you and I will come up with the same translation? Impossible. Now, we don't know whether that story is real or not, but that's the myth that's really famous, very famously known to many people. So that's when the Septuagint. Now the Septuagint is so important because when most of the New Testament scholars quote the Old Testament, they do not quote the Hebrew Old Testament text. 90% of the time, they quote the Septuagint. Okay? So all the quotation of the Old Testament that you find in the New Testament are the quotation from the Septuagint, not from the Hebrew text. And that tells us something about the Hellenization. Many of the people in the first century, even in the Palestine, were not able to speak Hebrew. It's like you guys, you're living away from China for so many generations that you guys lost the culture. I mean, you still keep the culture, but not many of you are able to write and speak Chinese as fluently as you wish. And that's exactly what was happening in the land of Israel. And so remember, the Septuagint is the work of the mastermind, and I believe this was the providence of God, that the Old Testament was translated into Greek, so that the more people were able to read and learn and benefit from it. Now, 198 BC, the Seleucid. Now, let me just go back. Now, so the Egypt was under the control of the Ptolemy, and then the Seleucids invaded Ptolemy, And the Seleucus, it defeated Ptolemy that then now that Israel was under the power of Seleucus, no more under the power of Ptolemy. So here, sorry. So in 198 BC, the Seleucid Antiochus III defeats Ptolemy at the Peneus, near the Mount Hermon, and seizes the control of Palestine. So from that time on, Israel is going another turmoil politically. Now, if you're under the the people of Israel were able to keep their religion peacefully under the power of Ptolemy. Now you're under the power of another secular country, which means that you will have to go through the transition period all over again because they have a different way of ruling. So you have to understand the kind of life the Jews went through during this period. There was they did not have a full independence. They did not have a full freedom in terms of their religion, in terms of their faith. So the people of Israel were constantly going through that trial politically and socially, and they were not able to settle down for good. So they were in chaos very, very, very often. Now, from 198 into 167, we call it the Seleucid or the Syrian period. We call it Syrian period because the Seleucid, the main part of the kingdom was in Syria. So we call the Syrian period, where we call it Seleucid period. Now, 198 to 167 BC, the Seleucids center in Antioch of Syria, ruled Palestine, and Hellenization of Jerusalem was greatly accelerated. Now, I need to what would happen when the Hellenization happened so quickly and so powerfully in the land of Israel? I mean, what kind of reaction would the Jews have as the people of Israel, as the people of God? What kind of reaction would you expect from the people of Israel as they were going through the radical Hellenization? We could have two responses: one welcoming Hellenization, and the other party opposing Hellenization. Now, if you understand yourself segregated as the people of God, you wouldn't like Hellenization. At the same time, there are some people who are more liberal politically. They want to settle down. They want the power within the situation they are in. So they might be pro-Syrian. They might be pro-Hellenistic, Hellenistic movement. So what happened was that there were people which we'll call the pro-Syrian Hellenizing party. These are the people of the Jews who supported the control of the Syrian government, and they are the people who support the pagan rule of the Israelites, and there were the Orthodox Jews who didn't like the Hellenization very much, and these are the people we call it. These are the people who are segregated from the rest of the society, and that's where we see the origin of the Pharisees. Now, who are the Pharisees in the New Testament? Pharisees are what? They are the scholars of the Torah, and they are arguing for the very strict adherence to Torah. These are the people who keep the Torah, until the last point. I mean, they want to keep the Torah as much as possible, right? These are the people, very devout Jews. Now, when the Hellenization happened, the Orthodox Jews who opposed Hellenization were the people who we call the Pharisees. These are the group of people who became the origin of the Pharisees. You understand what I mean? These are the people who didn't like Hellenization. These are the people who didn't like the rule of the pagan country. So this is the time when their religious attitude really became external, not internal. What they focused not so much on their internal attitude, but they focused more on the external attitude. Why? Because there was a great conflict between the Orthodox Jews and the pro-Syrian Hellenizing Jews, that they simply wanted to somehow remain in harmony. So what they did is that as long as I give my sacrifice, as the Pastor Timothy preached today, as long as I give my sacrifice, and as long as I have a circumcision and keep Sabbath, that's all that matters. So the religious became more formal, not internal, not spiritual. Now, there was an issue. And under the control of Syria, the Israelites were able to maintain their local rule under the high priest. What the Syrian kingdom did is that, okay, you can have your own rule, and you can choose your own high priest. You can have your own autonomy to a certain extent. But there was a problem. Now, the Orthodox Jews wanted to have a high priest from the line of Aaron. They were, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? They wanted to have a high priest from the line of a Levite. But the pro-Syrian Hellenizing Jews, they wanted to have a high priest who was friendly to the Syrian government. There was high priest Jason, the name Jason. He was one of the ruler of the Jews, but he was not the Orthodox Jews, but he was a member of the pro-Syrian Hellenizing Jew. What he did was that he bribed the Syrian government to replace the Orthodox high priest with a person who was the pro-Syrian. Now, when that happened, there was a great conflict within the body of the Jews. They were fighting each other, and there was a great conflict. And the king, Antiochus IV, heard about that conflict between the Jews, between the pro-Syrian Hellenizing Jews and the Orthodox Jew, that he got really upset. That he came into Jerusalem with the army, and he did the most horrendous things that you can ever imagine. What he did is that he replaces the Jewish high priest Ananias. He was the high priest who was supported by the Orthodox Jews, but he replaced him with the Jason, Hellenizer, and he invaded Jerusalem. Now, look at what he did. He forbid the circumcision. If you circumcise your own child, you will be killed. And he forbid the Sabbath. You cannot keep Sabbath anymore. And what else? And you're not able to give sacrifice to God in the temple anymore. You're not able to keep the Jewish festivals anymore. And he made a sacrifice of pigs on the altar. Now, the Jews don't eat pigs. But the Jews were forced to eat pigs. If not, they were killed. Now, the number of people who were killed were so many. If you read some of the ancient Jewish documents, it describes the situation as follows. The blood flowed like a river in the town, in the small town, because he would invade, he would go to the small town, and he would force people to do all these. And whenever they disobey the command, they will kill everyone, including the little child. So now he's the type of Antichrist. So now, if you were a Jew in the first century, you will be taught as a young Jew not to forget the name Antiochus IV. And if you read the book of Revelation, when they thought of the Antiochus, when they thought of the Antichrist, they thought that Antiochus IV would come back to life. and and it would harm the people of Israel. Once again, that's the kind of trauma that the people of Israel had from the Antiochus IV. I mean, he was the person who really did the things that they would traumatize the whole people of Israel. And even a little kid in the first century, they would sing a song that would curse the name of Antiochus. I mean, what kind of figure would you have in Malaysia? I mean, someone that evil. You wouldn't have to. Just imagine. So that was the kind of life that the Jews were having. Now, one day, the Syrian army came to one of the small towns, and that town was governed by the name was governed by the elder priest named Matthias. In the village of Mudain, it was a very small town, and this elderly priest named Matthias, he had 5 sons, and the Syrian army came to his town and asked them to do the same thing. No more circumcision, no more Sabbath, no more keeping of the festival. You're not able to give sacrifice anymore, and we're gonna put the temple of the Jews in your temple. Now, what Matthias did, he did not buy into it. Instead, he killed one of the Syrian officials, and he killed the renegade Jew who was supporting the Syrian government, and that started what we call the Maccabean revolt. In other words, because of the Matthias and his 5 sons, it got so upset by the way the Antiochus IV ruled the people of Israel. They got so upset they started to revolt against the Syrian government. Now, how can you win? I mean, the Syrian government, they had one of the strongest army at the time. How can they possibly fight against this gigantic army? Well, the answer lies partly in the geographic landscape of Israel. Now, if you go to Israel, I've never been to Israel myself, there are a lot of hills, right? You've been to Israel, there are a lot of hills and there are a lot of caves where you can hide, and the road is not well paved. Even if you have horses, you cannot go, so you cannot move as fast as you would in other places. Even if you have a chariot, the chariot will be no use because you have to go over the hill. So you have to be on your foot. So they used the landscape in order. It's like they were fighting as the guerrilla. They were fighting. They would come out of nowhere. They will seize the Syrian army out of nowhere. They will fight against them, and they will all disappear all of a sudden. That's how they fight. That's how they fought against the powerful and gigantic the Syrian army. Now, because of the fight of the Matthias and the sons, let me just show you the whole thing. They were able to gain independence from the Syrian government for the time being. Imagine now the Maccabees. Now you have to remember 2 names. Hasmonean is the name of the family where the Matthias is from. The Hasmonean family. That's the name of the Matthias, the priest who started the revolt. That Hasmonean is the name of the family. Maccabees, in Hebrew, it means hammer. The Maccabees was the nickname or title that is given to the son of the Matthias. The Judas was the older son of the Matthias, and it was the nickname or title that was given to Judas. Now, the Maccabees in Hebrew means hammer. Hammer, That shows how aggressive and how violent he was at war. He was so courageous. He was so powerful in the battle that he was able to win against the the Syrian army, and they were able to gain independence for the time being. So what Syria did, okay, we had enough, you won the fight. So they gave the Maccabees, or the family of Hasmonean family, you can rule over Israel. We're gonna move out of this country. You take care of this, you take care of this portion of the land by yourself. So we call them Maccabees. Now, if you Google, there are very famous Jewish document. The very famous Jewish document called the Maccabees, the first and the second Maccabees. These are the books which talk about the revolt of the Maccabees, the revolt of the family of Hasmonean family. It's very interesting. You can find the English translation on Google. It's like the historical books. You can read it through. It's very interesting. Now, so after they got their independence, what they did is that they restored the temple, because because I told you they offered the peace in the temple, and they really made the temple into the place where the pagan worship was done. So they cleared the temple, they rededicated the temple to God, and we call the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah. Have you ever heard the name Hanukkah before? That is the festival that the people of Israel are still celebrating even today. This is a very, very big festival for the Jews. And the Hanukkah is celebrated in order to commemorate the work of the Maccabees, who restored independence from the Syrian government, who rededicated the temple to God. And we see the Feast of Dedication in John 10:22. And the Judas and Jonathan and Simon. Now, these are the names of the son, and these are the names of the rulers of the Maccabees dynasty. We call the Maccabees dynasty. That's what happened. So after the Maccabees.
But why is it so short? Rules like 3 years for Judas and this.
Yes, what I'm going to explain. That's only the self-rule by the Maccabees. Then the Maccabee dynasty has become into the Hasmonean dynasty. Now we're going to look at it here. Slowly declining into a selfish group of Hellenizing despots. Now, what happened is that they had such a zeal for the temple, for the people of Israel, and for their worship of God. But what happened as the time goes on? Now, this is a part of what we call Hasmonean. The Maccabees only for the 4 years, but after that, these descendants of the Maccabees family, or the Hasmonean family, they built a dynasty called the Hasmonean family, which lasted about 70 years. So, okay, the 70 years. Now, the problem is that although they started with a zeal for holiness, for sanctifying the temple, and for sanctifying themselves for the glory of God, but what happened as the time goes on was that there are more people who are Hellenized and who are more Hellenized and who are more friendly to the pagan countries. Now, why were they so many Jews who are Hellenized and who supported the Hellenized influence? Why? Because it's easier for them to gain power. Because without the support of the pagan country, without the support of the Syrian government, their rule was very unstable. They should get the political permission from the Syrian government in order to survive as the people of Israel, in order to survive as a Jew. So there are people who were compromising their faith, who were compromising their political autonomy with the foreign country, with the foreign ruler, in order to maintain their power. So although the Judas and Jonathan, the Simon, as the dynasty comes down, many generations, many of their descendants forgot who their God was. Many of them forgot where they had come from. Many of them forgot what their great grandfather had done for the people of Israel. and we call this Hasmonean. Now, the Hasmonean is the family name of the Mattathias, right? It's the family name. The Hasmonean dynasty is really the continuation of the Maccabees dynasty. The Maccabees dynasty was only for 4 years, and then it goes on to the Hasmonean dynasty. Now, these are the names that were these are the names of the kings who ruled the Hasmonean. Now, Hasmoneans were only the small. Hasmonia was a dynasty that ruled the land of Israel and the land of Israel, and it was it was a continuation of the Maccabees, and by this time. By this time, there were a lot of conflicts again between the Hellenizing Jews and the Orthodox Jews. Now, those people who supported who supported the pro-Syrian and who are Hellenizing Jews, we call them Sadducees. Have you ever heard the name Sadducees in the New Testament? The Sadducees. We call the Orthodox Jews, as I said, we call them the Pharisees. Now, who are the Sadducees? The Sadducees were the very politically minded people. These people were the people who knew how to survive. So they had a very close ties with the Syrian government and with the foreign powers. And these are the people who are in charge of the temple. So Sadducees, and these are the people who are very politically powerful. So the Sadducees, we only hear about them up until AD 70. Once the Jerusalem temple is destroyed, there is no more need for Sadducees because there's no more temple there, right? So the Sadducees, when you read the Gospel, so you will see the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the people who are the teachers of the law, who are the very devoted Jews, and who had a very strong zeal for holiness and for the independence of Israel, whereas the Sadducees were the people who were politically more liberal, who had a close ties with the foreign power, who were in charge of the temple at the time, and who had a political power among the people of Israel. So there was always the political struggle between the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the people of Israel who are more orthodox in their faith, and the people of Israel who were more liberal in their faith. So the Hasmonean dynasty were there, and this is the only time that the people of Israel had their own autonomy for a long time. This is the only time where they had, although they had some conflict between the people, they were able to live in harmony. They were able to keep their own festival. They were able to offer sacrifices to God as the people of the Jews. But that didn't last too long. See, if you look at the history of Israel, they had an autonomy for some years, and the foreign country would invade, and they would go under the reign of the foreign country. So, Hasmonia and the Maccabees are one of the glorious days for Israelites. They gained independence, but the problem was that independence was not too long. Soon after, what happened? The general Pompey enters Jerusalem and establishes the Roman rule. In 63 BC, that's what happens. Now, Hasmonean dynasty was an important time for the people of Israel because, as I say, it was the time where they had that self-rule. It was the time where they were, it's a time where they were able to be themselves, to be the people of God. But in 63 BC, the Pompey, the name is very well known, right? I mean, you guys heard the name before. The Pompey, the general, came to Jerusalem and established the Roman rule. And from that time on, the land of Israel was again under the reign of a foreign power. 44 BC, the Julius Caesar assassinated in Senate by the Brutus and others, and the Caesar became the title for emperor. I mean, the Caesar was the name of the one of the emperor, but then later on, the Caesar, it just became the title for all the Roman emperors. In the 40 BC, Herod named king of Judea by a Roman Senate. Now the Herod, who is the Herod? Herod the Great was from the line of Macedonia, was the line from the Alexander the Great, and and it was the mixed breed of the Macedonian and Edomite. Have you heard the name Edomite? Edomite was the enemy. So he was the mix. He was the mixed of the Edomite and the Macedonian, and he was a very devoted Hellenist. He supported the Hellenization, wholeheartedly, and he hated Hasmonean. Now the funny thing is that his wife was his wife was a mixed blood of the Hasmonean and other tribes, and for that reason, his kids were the Hasmonean also because they have the blood of the Hasmoneans. But later on in his life, he hated the Hasmonean dynasty or the legacy of Hasmonean so bad that he killed his own wife because of the fact that the wife had the blood of Hasmonean. He killed his own son because the son would also have Hasmonean blood. That's how evil he was. Now, from the 31 BC on, this is the time of the golden age, the Roman law, the order to pax Romana, and the emperor worship. From that time, what happened is that whenever Roman conquered the new territory, they will rule. They will build. They will build the infrastructure for the newly conquered territory. They will build a school for them. They will build a temple. They will build the gyms for them. They will build the hall where they see. They will build a theater for them. So one of the reasons they did. One of the reasons that the Roman government did so many things for the conquered territory was because it was easier for them to rule. Imagine without the roads, they will not be able to rule all this gigantic territory as effectively, and without the theater and without the school and without the administrative buildings, they will not be able to rule this gigantic territory effectively. So whenever they conquer the new territory, they always build build the whole thing for the people. For that reason, many of the people like the Roman government because once they come under the power of Roman regime, their life got a lot more convenient. The roads were all paved. They had a new theater. They had a new school. They had new buildings all built for them. So that was one of the tactics to get the obedience from the people. Because since it was such a big territory, it was there was a big possibility that they would have revolts. In order to subsidize the revolt, in order to minimize the revolt, that's what the Roman government did. They provide a more convenient life. They provide a much comfortable life for the people, and they also, starting from the 40 to 50 AD, they emphasized the emperor worship. Now, the emperor worship was not as harsh as we understand up until the 50 or 60 AD. But from the 60 AD on, the emperor worship was a must, in the entire region of Mediterranean. So if you're living in the Mediterranean region by the AD 60, you will have to worship the emperor as God. Now, if you read the book of Revelation, which we're going to study next week, and if you read a lot of the New Testament, the First and the Second Peter, many of the trials that the early Christians were going through was because they refused to worship emperor. And one of the reasons that we see a lot of martyrs in the first century was because of the many Christians who refused to worship emperor. For that reason, they were sent to prison. They were sent to what do you call it? They sent to fight against the lions. You know, they were used as the entertainment of the Roman people, right? And if you've seen some of the Hollywood movie where the people are forced to fight against the lion, these are the Christians who refuse to worship emperor as divine as God.
But that is the case, right? Then the Jews also would have the same results of being martyred because of, or being killed because of not worshiping emperor. But we seldom heard about Jews.
The Jews were you must understand that there is a clear distinction between the Jews in the first century and the Christian in the first century, because for the Roman or for any of the pagan country, the Jews have been around for so many centuries. They always respect the Jewish way of life. Although they would not support the monotheistic worship of a single God, since the Jews have been around for so many years, the Jews were the important people in some parts of the Mediterranean world. The Jews were the people who had economic power. Like the Malaysian Chinese here in Malaysia, you are the people who had the most of the money in the country. So even though you have no political power, the Malay cannot ignore you guys because you guys have the money. That's exactly what was happening with the Jewish people. Since the Jews were, we see a lot of diaspora Jews in many parts of the Mediterranean world. The Jews were different from the Christians. The Jews had their own right. They had own right to worship their God. They had a synagogue wherever they were able to build a synagogue wherever they went. So Jews had all the right, but not Christians, because the Christians were seen as a newly established religious movement, and they were seen as a threat to the stability of the society, because what they did, the Jews would not go and evangelize other people, because they were born Jews and they don't have, they have no reason to evangelize, because you are the people of God because you are born Jews, right? But for us as Christians, we have given a great mandate to evangelize. So going outside and sharing the gospel with the people was seen as a threat to the stability of the society, because in the first century, the polytheistic, in other words, the worshiping many gods was the common. And when the early Christians were going around and saying that only Jesus is the only Savior, there was the radical claim, and nobody liked to hear it. And because of that, the Christians were not like the Jews. They did not have the freedom. They were not seen as favorably as the Jews by the Roman government. So yes, the Jews had their own rights, but not the Christians. Now, Jesus is born in Bethlehem, right? And the Herod, I call the crazy man, who was so evil, who was so insane. He dies in 4 BC, and after the death of Herod, Jesus was able to come back from Egypt. He went down to Egypt to avoid the persecution. And after the death of Herod, he was able to come back to Israel again, right? And AD 26, the Pontius Pilate becomes the governor of Judea, the well-known name that we see. In AD 33, Jesus is crucified, and AD 34, the conversion of Paul. Now, I'm just gonna.
I thought in the Bible also mentioned that there are Herods.
Herod the Great.
King Herod is still there.
He was a son of Herod. Now, after that point, they were the son of the Herod. So we have the name of Herod appears multiple times, and they're not all the same Herod. So you have to distinguish the name. The Herod the Great, who was the insane man who killed the wife and the wife and all those little ones in the city of Bethlehem, who killed the children. Now that's the father Herod the Great.
Yeah.
And after his death, the younger ones, the Herod the Junior, took over for many years, and then the Pontius Pilate becomes the governor of Judea. So yes, I mean I can give you some of the names here. This is the name of the emperor of the Roman government. I mean you don't have to.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Oh. Yeah.
Yes, this is the Herod that we are seeing. When Jesus was born, this Herod the Great was the king of Judea. Okay, this is the Edomite vassal ruler over the Philistine slaughter of infants in Bethlehem, and he had 3 sons. And the Herod. When you see Herod, we are talking about different Herod. So simply when you see Herod, it doesn't mean that you're looking at the same Herod. The Herod the Great was the father who was the first king of the Judea. As I said, he had a mixed blood of the Macedonian and the Edomite.
What's the meaning of a vassal ruler?
The vassal was he was the envoy, or he was the ambassador, or he was representative, sent by and permitted by the Roman government. Now, the only reason the Roman government made Herod the Great the king of Judea because he was a very, very pro-Hellenic. He was very pro-Roman, he was very Hellenized in his attitude, in his worldview. He was a Hellenized person inside out. And because of his political stance, the Roman government thought that, okay, he's the best person because he is pro-Roman government, he's the pro-Hellenization. He's the right person to rule over the land of Israel, the land of Judea. So because of his political, the liberal stance and his devotion to the Roman government, he was made the king of Judea. And now the Herod the Antipas, he's the one that he was the son of the Herod the Great. He's the Herod who beheaded John the Baptist. Not Herod the Great. All right. And the Herod the Antipas is the one whom Jesus called that fox, and the later stood trials before him. And if I go back here, now there were the Jewish revolts. There were the two the Jewish revolt. Now, have you ever heard the name Zealots? Zealots are the group of Jewish people who wanted to have independence so bad that they made themselves as a undercover or the secret the group of soldiers who are trying to overturn the regime of the Roman government in the land of Judea. These are the people who are politically so aggressive, and they're very aggressive in that they will always carry the dagger inside of them, and whenever they have an opportunity, they will kill the Roman soldiers, they will kill the Roman officials, so they will kill the Jews who are working for the Roman government. These are the people. So for the Roman government, these zealots were the word headache. They didn't know what to do with them because they did not stand out. They looked like just average Jews, but these are the people who had the intention of subverting the Roman government in the land of Judea. So, because of the many people not belong to this movement or this group of people called zealots, and because of their influence, there was the first Jewish revolt from the 66 to 73. Now, the revolt didn't go well. Now, for the first few years, they did well. They fought against the Roman government. The Roman government, and they were winning some of the battles, but the Roman government sent a huge troop to the land of Judea to control the situation, and so the 70 is the year when the Titus, the emperor of the Roman Empire, he destroyed the Jerusalem temple completely. And from that time on, there will be more Jews living abroad than living inside Palestine, inside the land of Judea. So you will have more diaspora Jews, and because of the persecution and because of the revolt, many people were not able to settle down in Judea, so they had to flee. So they flee to they flee to Asia Minor. They fled to Europe. They fled to many parts of the Mediterranean region, and that's the time when the diaspora Jews became really prevalent in other parts of the world, and that expulsion of the Jews is still going on even today. There are a lot of Jews in the parts of Europe who still are not able to go back to their home country. We call the Jews the diaspora, and they had another revolt in AD 132 to 135. We call the Bar Kokhba revolt. That's really the big revolt, again happening for the second time. And from that time on, the Jews exiled until modern times, and because the exile and that experience from 132 to 135 were so harsh and were so intense. They still look back to their old history, and they're still longing to go back to the land of Israel and establish their own. Now they have their own country, and they still have the Back to Israel movement among the people of Israel. There are many people, especially in the States at the moment. Well, as you know, the Jews are the major figure in American politics, in American economy, in American scholarship. Most of the famous universities, the well-known professors are all Jews. Many of the rich people are all Jews. Many of the well-known politicians have the Jewish roots. So, and because of that influence, now I guess they're still working in that movement where they're sending people back to Israel. They're still, and because of that, there's a great conflict between the Palestinian people and the Israelites. And if you are the people who have the theology, the pro-Israel theology, you will see hope. You will see it as the fulfilling of the Bible. But I'm more concerned about the human rights of the Palestinian people now, because what Israel is doing. Now I shouldn't go into that discussion, but I guess it's my opinion that as a Christian we shouldn't remain silent about the human rights of the Palestinian people. We often support what the Israelites are doing against Palestine, because we often think that Israelites are the people of are the people of God, but I don't see it that way anymore. I guess that's anyway. So now any questions?
This doesn't mention the Titus. How about I heard about this name King, Emperor Nero?
Nero, yes, Emperor Nero.
Burned the.
Yes, Emperor Nero was Emperor Nero was one of the most evil emperor. Now, Nero was the one who accused the Jews of the fire in Rome. There was a great fire in Rome that most of the buildings were burned down. And the Emperor Nero was in trouble politically because he lost the support from the people, and he had to be responsible for that big fire in Rome at the time. So what he did was that he wanted to get out of that accusation. So he blamed the Jews for that fire. And because of that accusation, he started to kill the Jews. So many of them. There's an incident where they will kill a Jewish baby and will use the body as a torch. You put it's like barbecue the baby, and you will put that on the road. And now we have because the human body have the oil, and if you
Yeah.
it will burn because we have the flesh, it will burn. So they would use the Jewish child as torch. That's how evil the Nero was. So for the Jews, they had two important figures for the Antichrist. Or one was the Antiochus IV, which we looked, and one was the Nero. So if you study the Revelation, when they talk about the possible return of the evil one, they thought of the Antiochus IV or the Nero. They thought that they would come back to life, and they would do the horrendous things once again against the people of Israel. That's how they thought. Yes.
So how does it make? Because I think the burning of the Jerusalem
Okay.
80, right?
80-70. Okay.
Yeah, and just now Titus was destroyed on years AD 70.
Yeah.
So that comes first. Then after that, the
Nero and Titus. Now, if you look at here, let me show you. Nero was from the 54 to 68, and the fire of Rome, the martyrdom of the Peter and Paul, and the Titus here.
or Titus after that.
Yeah, Titus here.
But Nero is the one that burned Jerusalem. Or
No, it was Titus.
Titus that.
Yeah,
burned?
yes.
Oh.
Nero has nothing to do with the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. Yeah. Now the evil king, the evil emperor, the background of Revelation is this king. The emperor was the Emperor Domitian. Now the great persecution which we know of, especially in the book of Revelation, is not at the time of Nero. I mean, a lot of people misunderstand. A lot of people misunderstand that Nero was the background of the Revelation. No, it was not Nero. It was the Emperor Domitian, who from that time, from the AD 81, the emperor worship became most severe. So if you're living on 81, 80 and on, and if you are not willing to worship your emperor as king, then you'll be in big trouble. So it was the reign of Domitian that the emperor worship became really standard for every citizen in the Mediterranean region.
So there was a time that John was sent to the island.
Yes, that's the time. Yeah, yes,
Yeah, this-
yes. The Claudius, he expelled Jews from Rome. Now, the Claudius expelled Jews from Rome. I mean, a lot of people believe that it was the time. It was the time when many of the Jews who were living in Rome were forced to move to the Asia Minor, as we are seeing in the First Peter. This is the time where the Claudius reigned. Now, many Jews were forced to live out of the Rome when there was a great famine. Now, when there was a great famine, you would have a lack of food. So they would choose the people to leave the city of Rome because they wanted to have the food for everyone, and it was the capital city, and it was very important politically. I mean, the city was very important politically, so they would not want to have any kind of revolt there. So they want the citizens of Rome to be happy always. So when there was a great famine, what the Roman emperor did was that they chose a group of people whom they thought to be social outcasts or the threat to the society. They would choose, they would choose this kind of group, and they were expelled from the Roman city because they wanted to have enough food for everyone. So, and usually the Christians were one of those groups who were expelled at that time. Any questions?
How about Paul time? Paul time?
Paul time here. He was from the time. He went through all these years. We don't know exactly when he died. I mean, we say, you know, we usually assume that he died somewhere in the late 60s. We don't know the exact date. So if it's the 60s, then the late 60s here. So we assume that the martyrdom of Peter and Paul. Peter and Paul died around the same time. 65, 66. We're all, we can guess up until late 68 or to 69, but 65 and 66 are the most popular dates for the death of Peter and Paul.
But Shin, all these records are taken mainly from which country? I mean,
Which country?
I mean, this is like a history lesson, right?
Which book?
Most of these records.
Yes, yes.
Are taken from which country?
I mean, which country? From the Roman Empire. All those historical writings that were written at the time are the evidence. We have many evidence besides the Bible. I mean, we don't have all this detailed information. We have this. We can find all this information from the ancient writings from the Roman Empire time. Yes, yes, we know. So it was that country. It was the empire. Historian, yes. We have a lot of historical writings that which talk about the history of Roman Empire. Yes, we have many documents, especially for the history of the Jews for the Second Temple Jewish period. We have a lot of Jewish documents that talk about the history of the Jews during those times. So, yeah. So does that help you a bit?
Yes. I want to know a bit about the Septuagint.
Septuagint.
Just now, you're saying that it's the Old Testament. Was there an Old Testament as what we have Old Testament when they translated to Septuagint, or
yes,
they are different set of books?
They had now the Septuagint includes many other Jewish writings which were written during that time, but which are not part of our Bible. Now, if you have the Catholic Bible, they will contain some of the Jewish writings which were written the Second Temple Jewish period as their canon. So they have more Bible books than us. So if you're the Catholic and if you happen to have the Catholic Bible, then they will have the books which are not included in our Old Testament. Yes, and the Septuagint. Yes, by the time they had most of the Old Testament writing written down. Yes.
So that means when the canonization of the Bible, that is actually the time where it includes the Old Testament.
Canonization happened in the 3rd century.
Yeah, 3rd century. The time was actually to get the entire Bible together, or when the canonization is only the New Testament and the Old Testament is just taken from the Jews, or?
Yes.
Yeah, how?
Canonization. There was a council. I mean, it didn't happen up until even for the whole canon was finally decided in the 3rd century. And even for the Old Testament, there was a great conflict between scholars and between priests, which one to include and which one to leave out. So it wasn't completely over up until 3rd century, even for the Old Testament. Yes, so there was a great debate among the early church fathers or the early church leaders, which book to include and which book to leave out.
So that means in the Jesus time, or even the 1st century, the Jews, what they have is actually other than the.
We're not the full collection that we have in the Old Testament. We're not the full collection. Usually, when they talk about the Old Testament, they will have the Pentateuch. Isaiah was considered to be a very important source, but many of the minor prophetical books that we have in the Old Testament were not considered to be the major, and were not considered to be the inspired word of God. So the whole canonization did not happen until the 3rd century. Yes, yeah.
But they still have access to all these minor prophets. Books.
They had the prophets. They had the access to it, but they did not consider as important as the Pentateuch. Yes, I mean the Pentateuch, the first five books of the Old Testament were considered to be most valuable, and some of the prophetical books, such as the Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, those are the major books that were considered to be very important for the Jews. For the other minor books, they were still being contested whether to be part of the canon or not. So it happened later on, yes.
But because the epistles where they are actually
They decided-
scriptures quoted,
Yes.
yeah,
Are from
which
the
refers to,
Septuagint.
yeah,
Yes, yes,
is actually from the Septuagint.
yes.
So does that mean that like Paul, when he's reading will be the Septuagint?
I think so.
Like,
Most of it. Now, I'm sure. I mean, he learned from the mastermind at the time. So Galileo. So he was able to read Hebrew. But many a times we see that even for Paul and many other authors of the New Testament, they were citing from the Septuagint, not from the Hebrew Bible. Yes. Any questions? Now we cover a lot of things today. If you go back and if you Google it, and if you read some of the website on the New Testament period, you might refresh your mind. And there are so many names that we cannot go into detail, and we cannot go every one of them. To study every one of them, I guess. I hope that it will be a rough overview of what happened. What happened during the Second Temple period. Okay? If not, can you close this in here?
Thank you, Father in Heaven, for such a good time that Shin can share with